Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. We are on the seventh season now, and today we have Aditi Sinha with us on the show. So Aditi is the co-founder of Locale. Locale.ai is an operations observability platform that helps businesses become more proactive. So we have been like I've known Aditi since Vaibhav from Better Capital connected us, I think back in COVID, and we have been in touch since then. And it's been like this episode has been pending for a long time, but finally we both got some time to come and do it. So hey Aditi, such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sunil, for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Perfect. So I gave like very one line and very short, sweet introduction about you and Locale. So tell us more about yourself first and how's your journey been into SaaS, and then like what exactly is Locale?
Sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Aditi. I'm one of the co-founders of Locale.ai. At Locale, I handle everything business, which basically comprises of everything apart from actually sitting down and writing code. What Locale is basically is an operations command center that helps business operations teams become more proactive. Right now, the product is very horizontal and we're working with companies across 15 different industries. So you can imagine anytime there is any kind of issue with your business ops processes, which could range from, let's say, an invoice not getting cleared on time, or a game not starting on time, or orders that were supposed to leave the warehouse at a certain time, but they have not been dispatched yet, or inventory not being available, or your stock not being available, right? So any kind of day-to-day ops issues or challenges like that, what we do is we basically sit on top of companies' data, we detect it from their data, and we make sure that that information is rallied to the right person in the team who needs to solve that. And then not only that, we make sure that the issue actually gets solved and the feedback loop is closed based on whatever steps that they need to take, right? So in another way, we basically say this is an ops observability platform or PagerDuty for operations, because what PagerDuty did for DevOps teams, we want to bring the same concept of observability to business operations teams and business operations processes. So
Nice.
that's a little bit about Locale.
Nice. And so like tell us more about like your journey been into SaaS, because I know you have you have some experience into SaaS in previous to Locale as well, and now you've been running Locale for about 4 years, a little over 4 years now.
Yes, of course. So actually, I graduated from BITS Pilani in 2018, and post that I joined this company called Social Corps, which is now called Atlin. I would say that's where my journey of SaaS started, because when I joined them, they were almost in the middle of their pivot as well from Social Corps to Atlin. So that's when I got the first flavor of what it is like to run a SaaS company. But post that, that's when I met my co-founder Rishabh, where we worked on a bunch of projects together. We work with operations teams, in industries like logistics, supply chain, FMCG, delivery companies. And that's where we saw that, the tooling that they actually use are very, built with patchwork and a lot of, internal tooling that is very bespoke. It is a mix of Excel sheets, BI dashboards, email reports that are sent to them. And the question we asked ourselves is, hey, if you look at any other team inside a SaaS company, almost every team has very specialized software that is built for them based on their workflow and their needs, right? Why cannot something like this be built for operations teams? So that is the question that we started Locale with. And, in December 2018, we both quit our jobs and decided to start the company.
Nice. And I do remember, like, since we have been talking for a while, so I know the current Locale is not the original Locale when you started 4 years back. So what was the story? Like you told about the story, like how you and Rishabh started, but tell us more about like what was the initial platform, right? What was like, let's call it Locale 1.0, and what was that Locale 1.0 look like?
Yes, definitely. So the problem statement and the market is actually the same as what we did in 1.0. It's just that, when we started that time, and because, there wasn't, I would say, a lot of tool in that space where we could also get some inspiration from. The hypothesis which we started Locale 1.0 was, okay, if operations teams are using so many different tools that are spread across, let's say, email reports and BI dashboards and some other, internal tooling, can we join all of this and create like one central ops control tower or command center? And that was, inspired a lot by, analytics tools that product teams use. So think, Amplitude or Mixpanel or, tools like that. And the idea was, like how PMs have a lot of these tools to help them understand how their, let's say, online products are performing. Where are users coming? Where are they dropping off? In which step of the journey, and so on? Can we build a similar product for operations teams? And we were more focused on ops teams that have ground fleet at that time. So can we help them understand how the ground is performing in terms of, let's say, where is demand coming from, where is supply deficient, where is, delivery times high, delivery cost high, and so on and so forth. So, the idea was the same. Can we build better tooling for ops? But when we build this product, we scale this product, backed, some very big logos. That's when we realized, while working with a lot of these teams, that, what they needed was not so much of a dashboard, but more of an observability platform that I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Got it, got it. And then what? And obviously, like Locale 1.0, and then like the new Locale as it is today, let's call it like Locale 2.0. So there was like a pivot there here, and that's where I want to double click on, right? Like how founders generally build when they're building companies and they pivot, and then how do you communicate this pivot to, let's say, your customers or your investors, and like your internal people, and how do you take their support, right, and into making sure that okay, this is gonna be the new focus of Locale, and this is where everybody needs to pitch in. So in a sense, like what was the things that you felt like while you were building Locale, and as you had got more customers and as you kept on progressing, you felt were missing, and or maybe something different, or maybe the world needs something, or your customers need something different, and that's when you decided to pivot. So what was the inflection point for the pivot particularly?
Sure. So I'll answer this question in two parts. I'll first talk about why did we actually, end up pivoting and what really happened. And then we'll talk about, how did we communicate that to the investors and everyone else, even the team, right? Because that's
Yeah.
also a major part of, the process when you're actually pivoting. How do you rally everyone towards that change? And there's a lot of change happening at a very lightning fast pace. So yeah, let's just first talk about how we actually pivoted. So when with the previous product, right, when we, let's say, started working with a lot of operations teams, right, what we realized was that, operations world is very chaotic. Something or the other would break every single day, and ops teams are constantly in that firefighting mode. Now you can imagine, right, if you're in the firefighting mode, you barely have time to sit and look at dashboards, look at trends, understand what do you do, how do you improve, how do you take better strategic decisions, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
right? What team started telling us was that, hey guys, can you instead, tell me what I'm supposed to do right now? Which fire do I need to put off at the moment? And can you give me on my phone? Right. So that's a common request that we started getting from all our customers. So we started building an alerting module on top of our previous product. Now, once we built that alerting module and we started selling that, that skyrocketed like anything, right? It seemed like everyone wanted that. But once we released the alerts, what we again realized that people wanted to close the loop with that alert. What I meant was that the managers and the heads and the VPs of operations, they wanted to understand, once an alert kicked in, how are their teams actually solving on that alert, like whether the problem was actually solved or not. And that is something that we did not have. And that is something, even if we built it into the previous product, we realized the product would become very bloated, because we already had a very heavy layer of maps and analytics, and the ability to drill very deeply into even, like, let's say 1 kilometer in your area, right? So, after a lot of deliberation, discussion, debates, we just figured out that it's just easier and better to build like an alerting and an incident management or an incident response solution together, right?
Got
And
it.
the whole philosophy was, can we build something which is very easy to get started with? So with all of that in mind, we decided, okay, let's just build this as a product completely from scratch. So it was not as if, we woke up one day and we were like, hey guys, let's just pivot, let's just change our product. It just happened very gradually. We shipped something, we got feedback, we shipped again, and we got another piece of feedback. And then we realized, maybe, instead of putting all of this into the previous product, it's a much better way to, go ahead by adding all of that into a new product and build the base from scratch again.
Got it. And I do know, like, you take care, as you mentioned as well, like, you take care of the business side of things, and Rishabh takes care of the tech or the product side of things, right? So there's obviously, like, two different priorities, to different ways of, to different perspective or looking towards this pivot, right? So what do you think like Rishabh's perspective was in terms of the pivot, right? Because I do know, was it like let's kill all code and start from like the first line of code, or was it like something, I do know you also mentioned that this is something you created as a module in the previous product and now it became like an entire product itself. So how did that transition happen as per Rishabh, or from the tech perspective?
Yes, I think that is something I'm actually very, very grateful for. A lot of, your tech co-founders, they're not very deeply involved with the business and the customer side of things. But Rishabh, on the other hand, is very, very heavily involved, right? So a lot of times, that perspective I would actually get from him, that, should we, that he was the first person who actually raised this question in the first place, right? Is it much easier to build a product from scratch for this or not, right? And that, the first time we had this question, I think it took us like 2 to 3 weeks to just figure out and deliberate whether it makes sense or not, right? And with that question in mind, we went to the entire tech and the product team, and we told them, okay guys, this is what we think, right? This is the pros, this is the cons of doing this, right? Like building this
Mm,
into a new product. You tell us, is this something that we're thinking about it in the right way or not? So
mm,
sort of took a collective decision, right? And it was very, very important to have the team's buy-in as to why it makes sense for the company and the business, right? And
mm,
we also have this rule in the company that we make sure that, a lot of our engineers go on customer calls very often. So for every customer call, we have someone from the tech or the product team who attends, right? So they are
mm,
also kind of close to customers, and they had also been hearing these kind of, requests and suggestions that we were getting from the previous product. So given that context, Rishabh and I, we basically decided, okay, let's just write all of this in a document, the pros, cons. Let's maybe, tell the team what our feedback and our thinking is. And if that makes sense to everyone else as well, because they are the ones who are on the ground, they are the ones who have to write this, right?
mm.
So let's take their perspective, take their buy-in, whether this makes sense. And I think once we did that, all of us, it was very, very clear to all of us that this is the best way to go about doing that.
Nice, nice. That's really great to know. Like the team is also involved in, like, so deeply involved in like making broad decisions, right? So yeah, we got to know about the customers because it came as a request from them, and like now the team. But how did this turn up, or how did this conversation go with the investors particularly, right? Because I've known that not all investors like would say yes, okay, like let's pivot, or not all would say like no, don't pivot. Like they have
Right.
their own perspectives. So how did this conversation with investors happen, like when you decided internally that you want to pivot, and then you went to the investors, you told them that hey, this is something that we have seen and this is something that is working, and now we are like pivoting. So how did you, or how are you trying to convince like your investors that this pivot is like the better version of this, of Locale, which is Locale 2.0, to your, maybe to the new investors or maybe to the old investors as well?
Sure. Again, I'll answer that in two parts, right? The first one is how did we communicate that? And also, how did we communicate them in such a way that it makes a lot more sense to them as well? And I'll explain what that really means, right? So in my
Mm-hmm.
previous answer, what I mentioned, right, that this pivot did not happen like, randomly on a day when we woke up, right? It was a series of
Mm-hmm.
very gradual steps that we took. And ultimately we realized, instead of putting all of those things in the previous product and bloating it, let's just take out the modules that are really working and double down on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So throughout that process of learning, iterating, getting feedback from the market, shipping, one of the things that we did really well was keeping our investors in the loop and keeping them informed. So we have like regular catch-ups with them, and where we sort of share what's happening, what is the feedback that we're getting, how are customers responding. And again, I would say here, we at Locale are very, very grateful that we have very, very amazing investors who we've partnered with at Chirate, who've been very supportive in this journey. So that was of course something that helped, because they obviously had context. They knew that alerting was working. They knew that people wanted an incident management module on top of alerts. They just did not know that we the way we are thinking about it now is that we wanted to build it into a different product. So we had a meeting with them where we sort of prepared very well and helped them really understand why we are doing what we are doing, right? So there were a lot of decisions that we took. Our earlier product was like a no code product, right, where you can come and, let's say, create matrix and do analysis without writing a single line of code. Again, a learning that we realized from that is that, every company has a very different way of storing their data, and they have a very different schema from each other. So, having a no code system meant that, they had to mold their schema and their data in the format that the product could understand, which would again delay a lot in integration and ultimately the sales cycle, right? For the new product, what we thought was, okay, now we know that every company has a different schema. What if we enabled a SQL layer? And what if we enabled analysts who are there in all of these companies to sit and write the logic for all their alerts, right? And this one decision, for example, has been such a game changer for us, because now, as long as you have data and you have someone who knows SQL, you can configure any kind of alert you want onto the product, right? And this opens up the market. And we now have, as I said, right, customers from 15 different industries that are not even linked to each other. We're working with SaaS, we're working with gaming. We onboarded a social media company very recently, of course,
Nice.
and we're working with logistics, e-commerce, and all of those kind of industries as well. So, it was very important to share the thought process about why we are doing it. How does this really impact the market? Helping them explain that this is a much bigger, much better opportunity that we are going after. And the fact that we were building it in a very self-serve, bottoms-up way. Again, as compared to our previous product, which was more enterprise sales driven. So I think a combination of all of that really helped us, help us convince them to see the world in which, we were also seeing.
Got it. And what were some of the questions that like came from the investors, particularly, that you felt like, were very challenging? Or did any questions, even came at such point where you had to, which kind of, challenged your thinking, right? Like, maybe, are you doing this right? Or maybe, is
Yeah.
this the right thing to do, like doing the pivot? So were there
Yeah.
any such questions, and what were those? And then how did you tackle like those?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the biggest ones was, why do we need to build a new product for this, right? Can't we have modules inside the previous product where we build incident management? But the SQL thing that I was talking about, right? The reason why we wanted to build the product was we wanted to change the base of the product from no code to SQL driven. Because I told you, right, every company's the way they store their data and their schema is completely different. That was the major reason why we decided to build a new product. Secondly, a lot of questions and discussions happened on, okay, what should we do of this old product and the old customers then? Should we keep running it? Should we, convert them from this product to another product? Should we, run both of them parallelly? What should we do, right? So that, I think, took a long time for us to figure out. And in the end, we decided to sort of, completely sunset the previous product and, so let all the customers go, which was again one of the hardest things that I've
Damn.
ever done. If you let go of that kind of revenue in pursuit of what you feel is a bigger opportunity, I think that is very hard. But I think both Shab and me and even the entire team, we all were convinced that this is a much bigger opportunity, and it makes sense to just double down on it. And doing two products at the same time with such a small team is not going to work for us.
Got it. That must have been like really difficult, as you're mentioning, like, letting those customers go from the previous
Yeah,
product. And I'm sure like some of them would have been like, they would
yes,
have pivoted to the new one as
exactly.
well.
Yes.
And so far, but yeah, Local 2.0 has been great so far. What were the new learnings from the pivot, right? And why did you think it, like, this pivot has been a successful pivot? So what kind of, like, metrics you're tracking, or what kind of, customer testimonials you're getting, that is helping you validate that, okay, we have done the right thing by pivoting from 1.0 to 2.0?
Sure. So if you think about it, the previous product was an analytics product. With an
Mm-hmm.
analytics product, one challenge is that, even if you're using those insights to implement your decision, it's very hard to attribute that back to the analytics product, right? You cannot say that, I saw this graph, I took this decision, and this is why my metric moved. Like, that is very abstract. But
Mm-hmm.
with Locale, right, with the new concept of alerting and incident management, because number one, the alert is very actionable. Every time an alert goes to you, you're supposed to take an action on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you know there's an escalation matrix on top of that, and the alert gets escalated to your manager, it's very easy now to track, okay, because of this alert, what are your teams actually doing? What steps are they taking? And when was this issue solved? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, right, we're able to now demonstrate very simply, the before and after. So before Locale, this was your actual SLA. Now with Locale, this is how much, how much your SLA percentage has increased, for example. So again,
Hmm.
different companies are using it for variety of different use cases. But with most of the companies we've seen, the testimonial and the outcomes have been so phenomenal, right? People
Hmm.
have been able to, in less than 1 month, quantify the impact that they're getting from the product. For example, with one of the health tech companies, they mentioned that their assignment rate has increased from 95% to 99%. In
Hmm.
one of the very large hyper local delivery companies we're working with, in just 45 days we have seen that the billing time, the time that they used to spend before the billing would happen, that has reduced by 1.5 hours after they started interacting with Locale, right? So
Nice.
seeing very amazing results. The metrics that we're tracking are very common SaaS metrics, having like a very clear idea on our weekly numbers in terms of, let's say, the signups, the activations, the onboardings, and expansion. So now Locale is a very land and expand game. So
Hmm.
we also tell companies, right, that you start with 1 or 2 use cases and see the value and see what kind of adoption it is giving you. And after that, you can keep adding use cases and adding members in your product as well, right?
Hmm.
So it's been so crazy that once people start from ops use cases, we've seen they also go into product use cases now. So that is
Hmm.
something we never thought would happen, right?
Nice.
So I'll quote a customer on this. On one of the testimonials, they mentioned that Locale is not built on a particular use case or an industry, but it's built on a problem.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely seeing good growth and very excited to see what 2023 has in store for us.
Nice. And I'm very happy that you mentioned about the ROI part, right? Like you are tangibly, like as the product one, like Local 1.0 was something that, was very passive and you wouldn't, it's like you don't see a graph and then you might take an action and then you attribute that ROI from that action back to the graph because that's
Yeah,
where you identified. But in terms of
yeah,
the 2.0, it's like more proactive, as you mentioned. And now more and more companies and like the Gartners and Foresters are saying that all SaaS companies have to give ROI, right? Like it's some kind of tangible ROI that your product have to show to your customers. Only then it becomes sort of become like even a good to have or must haves, because in today's economic world, like where tools are getting ripped off and people are getting laid off, I'm sure that the CFOs and the revenue team and the overall company would want to cut down their costs, and in that you don't want your product to be the one that gets affected, right? So like showing
yep.
ROI has become like more important than ever in 2023, and great that this pivot is the one that is helping you achieve that. Cool. So any before we move on to the next round, which is the lightning round, any like tips that you would share to any founders who's listening about like how do you communicate your pivot to the investors? So what are probably like the 3 or 5 tips that you would want the founders to listen?
Sure. I think ultimately at the end of the day, any investor that you're talking to, right, they care about how big the opportunity that you're pursuing is, right? So even when you're pivoting, if you can show him and if you can demonstrate, right, that this new opportunity that you have very high conviction on, and of course you have some data backed by it, which in our case was a lot of, requests from customers saying they want alerts, they want a way to measure what happened on the alert. I think once you can show that this is a much bigger opportunity and this is something that the market is actually pulling out of you, I think you should be in a good place, right? So showing
Hmm.
why it makes sense, how did you arrive at that, at a new idea, and why it is a very large opportunity to go after. I think if you can craft a good narrative and a story around this, you should be in a good place.
Perfect. That's a great piece of advice. And then, so moving on to the lightning round. So I will ask like 3 questions and you'll have to answer. Since the section is called lightning round, you'll have to answer like whatever's on top of your head. So let's start with the first thing. So what's the one thing that has helped you shorten your learning curve?
I think just doing it, like getting things done the first time or the first draft or the first version of anything that you do is so shitty. But the important thing is that you do it and then you iterate on top of that. No matter whatever you read, you watch, you talk to other people. That of course helps, but I think the biggest learning curve that you get in anything that you do is just by doing that kind of doing that work or the thing that you have to get better at.
That's great. Great. Let's move on to the second one then. I know everybody talks about successes but I like to focus on failures as well, because that's where you learn, and by sharing your failures with other like publicly, a very hard thing to do, but then you are helping others learn as well. Right? So what did your professional failure teach you?
I think the professional failure for me, I would not call it a failure, but if there was an instance that I had to talk about, would be building the first version of the product.
Mm.
I think the failure on our part would be if we could have identified, even if we started with a hypothesis and we built a product, if we could have identified sooner that this is the product that the ops teams
Mm.
actually need and the product they want, we could have iterated on this new product much faster. So what that taught me was that, like once you have like it's very easy to iterate on your core idea when you have a very small team, like less than 5 people. But I guess more than 5, so we were about 15 people, or so when this idea of pivot happened, right? And like rallying 15 people and
Mm.
making sure everyone understands the purpose behind it, why you're doing it, all of that takes a lot of time and comes with its own set of baggage. So I guess my failure and the learning point would be that, unless you're really, really sure that this is the product that you want to build and this is the product that your customers want, don't increase your team size, even though it's so tempting to do that.
Got it. Interesting. And then the last one. So what's like the one book that you're currently reading and you would recommend to all the other founders?
I read a lot of different kinds of things. I read fiction, non-fiction. I read a lot of poetry. But I guess because a lot of our audience is in the tech space, my recommendations would be, and one book that actually helped me a lot through this pivot is this book called Messy Middle. I would recommend everyone who's considering or thinking about changing the product to read that. And maybe if I can share one insight with everyone, Sunil, one of the questions they asked in the book was, it was basically about whether you want to continue with your company or not, right? And the
Mm.
question that he asked was, if you knew whatever you know about your market, your product, your customers today, right? Imagine if you had the same insight on day zero when you were starting the company. Do you think
Mm.
with that new knowledge, does it make sense to start the company or not? Right, what
Mhm.
he's actually asking you is, now with the knowledge that you've learned, is there anything new that you have picked up on, or any new insight that you know about your market or your customers that you really really think will help you in building the company? If yes, keep going at it, and if no, maybe it's time to move on from that company. Because even if you're at it and you're not getting new insights about your customers and your market, it doesn't make sense to continue. So I think Messy Middle is a very, very interesting book about pivots. But other startup books that I really love is Shoe Dog. It's by the CEO of Nike called Phil Knight. There's another one that I really, really love. It's called Creativity Inc. It's by the founder of Pixar, on how they went about building Pixar. So those would be the 3 books that I would recommend.
Nice. For everybody listening, Aditi was talking about The Messy Middle by Scott Belsky. He was the founder of
Yes.
Behance. Interesting. So, such a great time, Aditi, and such a great conversation about pivots and like how do you communicate it to your customers, your internal teams, and obviously your investors as well, and how to get their buy in. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all these great insights with us.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of pleasure talking to you as always, Sunil. Bye.